Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. We're talking about spring bears today, specifically what they're eating, how they move, and why understanding that matters far more than simply covering ground and hoping to spot one. Spring bear season is one of the most honest windows into animal behavior you're ever going to get because bears come out of hibernation with one priority: efficient calories. When you understand that, spring bear stops feeling random and starts feeling more predictable. A lot of hunters approach spring bear hunting like it's a glass and prey game. They bounce from ridge to ridge, scan big country, and assume bears will eventually show up if they're patient enough. And sometimes that works. Most of the time, though, it doesn't because it ignores what actually drives bear movement after denning. Bears don't roam aimlessly in the spring. They're not traveling long distances just to explore. Their movement is dictated by food availability, snow conditions, and energy conservation. Every step costs calories they can't afford to waste early in the year. That means bears are tied tightly to specific food sources and predictable travel routes, especially in the first weeks after they emerge. Spring food is limited, it's patchy and constantly changing. Green up doesn't happen everywhere at once. It starts in specific places: south-facing slopes, lower elevations, exposed ground, and slowly climbs uphill as snow melts. Bears follow that progression closely. When you see a bear in the spring, it's almost never by accident. It's because that spot is offering something that bear needs right now. In this episode, I'm going to break down the primary food sources bears key on after hibernation, how elevation and snowline influence where those foods appear, and how bears move between feeding areas and cover throughout the day. We'll also talk about why spring travel patterns repeat year after year and how you can use that predictability to glass with purpose instead of guesswork. If you want to consistently find bears in the spring and understand why they're there when you do, this episode will give you that framework to do exactly that. Spring bear behavior is driven by one thing above all else: survival efficiency. When bears come out of hibernation, they're in a caloric deficit. Fat reserves are depleted, muscle mass is reduced, and their digestive system is transitioning back to processing food. That reality shapes every decision they make in the early spring. Contrary to what some hunters believe, bears don't explode out of dens and start roaming the landscape randomly. Movement costs energy, and early spring is not the time to waste it. Bears are deliberate. They move with a purpose, and that purpose is finding food that provides the most calories for the least effort while keeping them safe when it could still snow. This is why early spring bear movement is often limited in range. Instead of covering long distances, bears operate within relatively tight areas where food, cover, and security all overlap. They'll often stay on the same slope, in the same drainage or elevation band for days at a time if food conditions remain favorable. When those conditions change, they don't wander blindly, they shift incrementally. Another key driver is vulnerability. Bears are slower and weaker coming out of hibernation than they will be later in the year. That makes security important. They tend to favor terrain that allows them to feed while remaining closer to cover, escape routes, or thick bedding areas. Wide open feeding areas with no protection are far less attractive to bears early on, even if food is present. Temperature and sun exposure also play a role. Bears rely heavily on warmth in the spring, especially in colder climates. South-facing slopes that warm early not only produce food sooner, they make bears more comfortable and more active. Warmth reduces energy expenditure and helps digestion, which is critical early on. Understanding those drivers is foundational. Spring bears are not unpredictable, they're conservative. They choose locations that solve multiple problems all at once: food availability, minimal travel, thermal advantage, and security. When you start viewing spring bear behavior through that lens, their movement becomes, far easier to pattern and anticipate and far less mysterious. In the spring, bear movement is tightly tied to one thing: the green up. After months of hibernation, bears need easily digestible food that's low effort in calories to restart their system. That's why the first foods they seek aren't berries or high-fat fall foods, they're grasses, forbs, and fresh vegetation that appear as snow melts. And like we talked about earlier, green up doesn't happen evenly across the landscape. It starts in very specific places. South-facing slopes receive more sunlight, warm faster, and expose ground earlier than north-facing aspects. Those slopes produce the earliest grasses and forbs, and that makes them magnets for spring bears. When you're glassing in early season, these are the areas that should draw your attention first. Early spring vegetation is high in moisture and nutrients, which helps bears rehydrate and kickstart digestion. Bears will often feed for long periods in small patches of green, slowly working their way across a slope rather than traveling far. If you see a bear feeding in the spring, it's usually because that exact spot is offering something it can't easily find elsewhere yet. As snowline rises, bears follow it uphill. This doesn't happen in big jumps, it happens incrementally. A few hundred feet of elevation can make a big difference in available food. Bears may drop down at night to feed lower or climb during the day as sun exposure creates new green patches. Understanding that vertical movement is key to staying in bears as conditions change week to week. Another early plant food includes roots and tubers that are exposed by snowmelt, especially in disturbed ground or south-facing benches. Bears will dig selectively, not randomly, often returning to the same productive spots year after year. Those areas don't look impressive on a map. They're reliable. The key takeaway is this: spring bears are food focused and location specific. If you aren't seeing bears, it's rarely because they aren't in the unit. It's because you're not looking at the food that matters right now. While green up is the backbone of spring bear diets, it isn't the only thing bears are keyed in on. Spring is a lean season. There's not a lot of food options for them, and bears are opportunistic by nature. When high value food presents itself, they take advantage of it, even if it's temporary or unpredictable. Understanding those secondary food sources helps explain why bears sometimes show up in places that don't look green at all. One of the most important opportunistic foods in the spring is winterkill. Carcasses from deer, elk, moose, or livestock that didn't survive winter represent a massive calorie payoff for very little effort. Bears will often travel surprising distances to check known wintering areas, migration corridors, and south-facing drainages where animals tend to winter and die. Those food sources don't last long, but when they're available, they can anchor bear movement for a few days. Carrion also explains why bears often appear along edges, timberline transitions, creek bottoms, open benches below winter range. Those areas concentrate both wintering ungulates and carcasses, making them worth checking even when green up seems minimal. Insects are another overlooked spring food source. As snow melts, ants and other insects become accessible and active, especially in rotting logs, south-facing timber, and disturbed ground. Bears will flip logs, dig into ant hills, and work small areas thoroughly when those insect proteins are available. This behavior often happens close to cover, and it's easy to miss unless you're looking for that subtle sign. Protein matters in the spring, especially for bears recovering muscle mass after hibernation. While plants dominate the diet, bears will supplement whenever possible. That's why food scarcity tightens movement patterns. When resources are limited, bears don't wander, they focus. The secondary food sources don't replace green up, but they shape travel. Bears move between known feeding areas, checking high probability spots along the way. When you understand what those spots are, you stop wondering why bears appear in odd locations and start seeing the logic behind their movement.
This episode is brought to you by TideWe and their revolutionary see-through ground hunting blind. If you've ever hunted out of a traditional blind, you know the trade-off. Either you can't see out without cracking a window, or the second you do, you risk being spotted. That's where TideWe's see-through ground blind changes the game. From the inside, you get a full 270-degree field of view through 3 walls of one-way see-through mesh. You can see every movement outside without opening a thing. But from the outside, you stay completely concealed. Game animals can't see in, even when you're sitting just a few feet from them. This blind is fast and simple to use. The pop-up hub system lets you set up or take down in just a couple minutes. Noise-free sliding windows give you multiple shot options without spooking animals. Brush-in loops let you blend it into your surroundings, and the open bottom design makes it easy to stay quiet and comfortable. You can choose between 2 sizes, the 2 to 3 person or the larger 3 to 4 person version like the one I'm using here. And you've also got your choice of 150D or the more durable 300D fabric, so you can pick what fits your style of hunting best. The price of this blind is already phenomenal, but you can get another 18% off by using code BBU18 at checkout. That's BBU18.
In the spring, elevation, aspect, and snowline matter more for bears than almost any other time of year. Those three factors determine where food appears first, how long it lasts, and how bears move across the landscape as conditions change. If you ignore those, you're guessing. If you understand them, you're going to follow them like a roadmap. Snowline is the simplest place to start. Bears don't just appear randomly at certain elevations, they follow melting snow uphill as green up progresses. Early in the season, that often means lower elevations with exposed ground. As days get longer and temperatures rise, bears gradually move higher, tracking fresh vegetation as it becomes available. This movement is slow and deliberate. It's not like it's a mass migration. Aspect controls how fast that process happens. South-facing slopes receive more direct sunlight, melt sooner, and produce food earlier. East and west-facing slopes follow next, depending on exposure and wind. North-facing slopes are typically last to open up and are often avoided early unless other food sources are present. When you're glassing, aspect should dictate where you spend the most time, not just elevation. But elevation bands can change weekly in the spring. A few hundred feet can be the difference between bare ground and knee-deep snow. Bears adjust accordingly. You might find bears feeding low in the morning, then moving higher as slopes warm through the day. In some cases, they'll even drop back down in the evening if lower elevations green up faster. Vertical movement is fluid in the spring, so you've got to be flexible as well. Broken terrain matters too. Slopes with a mix of rock, timber, and open ground melt unevenly, creating pockets of food that last a little longer. Those micro pockets, those micro green zones, can hold bears longer than large, uniform slopes that green up all at once and then fade. When you understand how elevation, aspect, and snowline all work together, spring bear movement stops feeling random and bears aren't wandering. They're following the edge of opportunity. If you stay focused on that edge, you stay in bears as condition changes. When you understand how elevation, aspect, and snowline work together, spring bear movement stops feeling random. Bears aren't wandering, they're following the edge of opportunity. If you stay focused on that edge, you stay in bears as conditions change instead of constantly trying to play catch up. Spring bear travel patterns are far more structured than a lot of hunters realize as well. Bears aren't wandering the landscape hoping to stumble into food. Their movement is shaped by terrain, security, and efficiency. Once you understand how and why bears travel in the spring, you can start predicting where they'll show up instead of reacting when they do. Early spring travel is usually short and purposeful. Bears move between feeding areas and nearby cover rather than just making long distance moves. They prefer routes that minimize elevation change and energy cost while keeping them close to escape options. That's why spring bears are so often spotted on ridge fingers, benches, creek bottoms, and the edges of timber. These features allow bears to move while staying protected and conserving calories. Terrain funnels movement in predictable ways, just like ungulates like deer and elk. Ridge fingers that drop into green slopes, benches that contour around hillsides, and old logging roads or game trails often become repeat travel routes. Bears will use the same paths repeatedly if food remains available. This repetition is why bears show up in the same general places year after year during spring seasons. Security plays a major role as well. Bears are more vulnerable early in the year, so they tend to travel with cover nearby. Open crossings are brief and intentional. When bears step into the open, it's usually to feed, not to travel. Travel itself often happens just inside the cover where they can move unseen and pause to assess conditions. Water also influences spring travel. Creek bottoms and drainages green up early and offer both food and travel corridors. Bears will move up and down those features, feeding opportunistically along the way. And so those routes are especially important during warm afternoons when bears may shift movement to cooler shaded terrain. The key mistake hunters make is assuming travel equals distance. In spring, travel is about connection, not coverage. Bears connect food to security using the easiest, safest routes routes available. If you focus on those connections instead of glassing randomly across open travel routes, bear movement starts to feel repeatable. And repeatable movement is exactly what allows you to intercept bears consistently instead of just relying on luck. Now, daily timing is one of the most misunderstood parts of bear hunting behavior. Many hunters expect bears to follow strict morning and evening routines similar to fall patterns, but in reality, spring bears often move when conditions are made efficient, not when tradition says they should. Temperature and sun exposure drive much of the movement. On cool spring days, bears may be active for long stretches, feeding steadily across open slopes as green up warms in the sun. But on warmer days, movement often shifts towards shaded aspects like timber edges and creek bottoms, especially during the middle of the day. This is why midday sightings are far more common in spring than a lot of hunters expect. Bears also adjust timing based on security. Early in the season, when pressure is light, many bears may feed openly for hours. As pressure increases, though, movement becomes tighter and more deliberate. Bears may feed briefly, retreat into cover, then reappear later once conditions feel safe. Those short windows are easy to miss if you're not glassing consistently. Morning movement often involves bears leaving bedding cover to reach feeding areas, but that doesn't always happen at first light. Cold mornings, shaded slopes, or overnight snowfall can delay movement until sun hits a slope and temperatures start to rise. Likewise, evening movement may begin earlier than expected if food is nearby and security allows it. Another factor is digestive pace. Early spring diets are high in moisture and low in fat, which allows bears to feed more frequently without the longer rest periods. This can lead to multiple short feeding bouts throughout the day instead of just one long session like in the fall. The key is patience and persistence. Spring bear movement doesn't always announce itself. Bears may appear for minutes at a time and then vanish into cover. Hunters who glass methodically, revisit productive slopes, and understand how timing shifts with conditions are going to see far more bears than those who rely on just rigid schedules. Timing in spring has to be flexible, and learning to read it is a major advantage. Now, all of this information only matters if it changes how you hunt bears. The biggest mistake a lot of spring bear hunters make is glassing without a plan. They look at big country, hope something moves, and then relocate when it doesn't. When you understand spring food sources and travel patterns, glassing becomes targeted instead of random. So start by identifying where green up is actually happening right now, not where it should be, not where it was last year, but where snowline aspect and sun exposure are all creating fresh feed today. South-facing slopes, broken terrain, and lower elevation benches should always be your first priority early in the season. If there's no food, there won't be bears, no matter how good the country looks. Next, look for an overlap. Bears rarely feed far from security in the spring. The best areas are where feeding slopes sit directly above or below timber, thick cover, or broken escape terrain. These transition zones allow bears to step out, feed, and disappear quickly. Bears showing themselves briefly and then vanishing isn't bad luck. It's just a clue you're in the right area, and that's just what they're doing. Patience is critical. Spring bears don't move constantly. They appear in short windows, often just minutes at a time. If you leave too quickly, you miss those windows. The hunters who consistently kill spring bears from spot and stalk are usually the ones who glass the same slope for hours, return to it day after day, and just trust the process. Use travel routes to your advantage as well. Once you spot a bear feeding, don't just focus on that exact location. Look at where it came from and where it disappeared. Ridge fingers, benches, timber edges, and creek bottoms all are often connected by multiple feeding areas. Bears reuse those areas and those routes, and intercepting travel is often more reliable than just waiting for feeding movement. And finally, remember that spring bear hunting is about stacking probabilities. Food, aspect, elevation, cover, and timing all need to line up. And when they do, bears aren't all that hard to find. They're doing exactly what they need to do. You just have to be looking in the right places for the right reasons long enough to see it happen. Spring bear hunting is one of the clearest lessons in animal behavior you'll ever get if you're willing to slow down and pay attention. Bears in the spring aren't random. They aren't wandering, and they aren't hard to find because they're elusive. They're doing exactly what they need to do to survive efficiently, conservatively, and in ways that repeat year after year. When you understand what drives bears after hibernation, everything starts to connect. Food determines location, snowline and aspect determine timing, terrain determines travel, security determines how visible bears are willing to be. Miss one of those pieces, and the country could feel empty. Put them together, and bears start showing up in places that suddenly make sense. Spring also rewards discipline. It rewards patience behind glass. It rewards staying put when conditions are right instead of bouncing around hoping to get lucky. Bears move in short windows along predictable routes tied to specific food sources. The hunters who consistently find bears aren't covering more ground, they're watching better ground longer. The bigger takeaway is this: spring bear hunting isn't just about bears, it sharpens how you read terrain, food, and movement for every other season. If you can consistently find bears in the spring, you're learning skills that translate directly to elk, deer, and other western species. You're learning to hunt structure instead of stories. Bears aren't hiding, they're following opportunity. And when you learn to follow that same edge, food, terrain, and timing, you stop guessing and start hunting with intent. Now, if you're serious about taking this kind of preparation deeper, that's exactly why I built Team Backbone. It's more than just a membership, it's an inner circle for hunters who want to train with purpose, hunt smarter, and stop guessing whether they're actually prepared. Inside Team Backbone, you're going to get 20% off site wide on all Backbone Unlimited gear, the option to have a t shirt shipped to your door every month, and full access to the digital content vault. That vault includes training advice, backcountry strategies, checklists, guides, and mindset tools built specifically for Western hunters. You'll also get access to a private Facebook group with direct access to me and a community of driven hunters who live relentless, plus direct call, text, or email access for personalized advice on training, hunting strategy, or sharpening your edge. On top of that, you're automatically entered into exclusive monthly gear giveaways. This is built for hunters who want to do things right, not just do them hard. If that's you, Team Backbone is waiting for you at backboneunlimited.com underneath our membership tab. Thanks for being here. I appreciate all of you. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.